So I think we're alive here for a little bit of a panel discussion. Everybody up here has been a speaker today except for Jeff Cross. I pulled Jeff up here so he could give a couple of minutes. Jeff is with Narwhal and they build the NX, which is I will let you explain it rather than fumble with it.
So NX is, how would you describe it, Minko? It's built on Angular CLI, or the technologies that power Angular CLI, and it's a tool for managing monorepos, basically. So it's focused on front end, so it's both code generation, like really intelligent code generation, and a way of partitioning libraries. It understands your dependency graph. It helps you enable fast builds, only building what's affected. A lot of things that they talked about with Bazel have inspired what NX is, and so it's a team. It's been around for a couple of years. Lots of enterprise teams are using it. Yeah, I guess that's the short version of it. Check it out at nx.dev if you haven't heard of it.
Mm-hmm. And we are big I forgot I get this. We are big proponents of using it. We are NXifying applications that we get our hands on. So we're going to trademark that. I found out they haven't trademarked that yet. So, but one thing that we've been trying to do is we're trying to bridge what feel like very disparate worlds, because you have this area that Steve was just talking about. You've got these governance processes, and if you look at it just on the surface with a glassy eye, you think, oh, that's bureaucracy, or that's this thing. But there needs to be tooling to facilitate what we are striving for, which is empowerment of the individuals. And so we heard that from Stephen's talk of talking about how you can empower. And so we're trying to bridge all these things, protect the applications that we're trying to build, and provide all this kind of a coming together as the whole industry kind of comes of age. I wish we had solved this all 20 years ago. I've been at this way too long, seeing us struggle with the same thing over and over and over. But I am kind of curious, especially I'm going to ask the first question specifically of the Google and Atlassian guy we got up here. How do we bridge the world that we've been talking about? Do you see any way to kind of push kind of the good things that Google's doing out to the larger enterprise organizations? Do we have a way to bring some of the flexibility that the guys at Google were talking about in through the Atlassian tool set? I'm looking for ways to build bridges here and to provide a better platform for our customers in the enterprise. So anybody want to jump on that?
No, please.
Well, if you give it to Jeff, he won't stop. So
one piece of that I didn't touch on in my talk is actually that the Angular team uses Jira for some project management. So we definitely have all these philosophies, and we try and start with the idea of empowerment and good governance that leads engineers into making the right choices and managing the technology in a good way that's going to ultimately support the organization. But along the way, as I kind of mentioned and I alluded to, you do need great tools. And so I think starting with the culture and then figuring out how do we make those tools work for that culture can be effective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I, by the way, really did enjoy your presentation quite a bit, particularly about the cultural aspects of how you execute and the trust and in automation. Excuse me. So, from an Atlassian standpoint, and again, I'm recently acquired, if you will, by Atlassian, but Atlassian's huge on culture as well. Highly visible and published, and they live very, very directly to those values. What's interesting to me, and Chris, correct? Chris and I chatted a little about at lunch, is that difficult area in the middle. You've got exceptionally talented people, not only at Google, but many technology companies, clearly. And then and there's that question of autonomy, yes, the opportunity for those teams to make decisions, whether it's tooling or processes, and then how that scales up and ties more directly to the enterprise priorities and strategies, and how that visibility and traceability at various levels gets achieved. And So I don't think there is an easy answer to it. Our technology is probably a bit heavier than that when you talk about building out that, whether it's from the mission, vision, values, or just to the strategic initiatives on down. But I know culturally we're trying to do very much of the same things. And as Chris and I were talking, I think organizationally there may be a tipping point that I don't think that I have no internal understanding, but it doesn't feel like Google ever kind of had, which was to go from a more traditional waterfall-y mindset and set of processes and funding mechanisms to a much more, agile. But that's the challenge that a lot of the organizations that I'm talking to are really trying to navigate. And that's what Chris and I chatted about at lunch, that notion of when does the organization get to where those waterfall practices aren't the standard and that level of autonomy and then roll up becomes kind of more natural and automated. And so, sorry, I don't have anything that would qualify as a solution to that, but that's the problem statement I think that a lot of the enterprises we talk with are really focused on.
Okay, thanks. And for the, we'll just pass around. For the other guys, question. If you're a director or a development manager in an enterprise, you're kind of caught between the C-suite and the people in the trenches. And you're kind of in that terrible position of being torn apart because you have to provide answers while you want to provide incentives for productivity. Where would you start in trying to introduce some of these governance ideas? And that's where's a good place to start? If you've heard a lot of things today and you think they're good ideas, where would be a good place to start? Anything come to mind?
I'll answer that through an experience that we've had with customers. So what winds up happening is the people that need to deal with problems get overwhelmed, not only with the number of problems they get, but also in the way they get them. Usually it represents itself as a couple of hundred emails in their inbox and they don't know what to do with them all. And so what that literally translates into is the people that are asking for those results, oftentimes middle management or people that are trying to do their real job, get told that there is a lead time for questions and things like that. And so that becomes a pain point that then starts the conversation around governance. Why does it take me a month to add an extra field to my screen or something like that? What is it that's driving this? And then that starts to generate the conversation around the need for governance, which then generates the conversation around the processes and the structures around that governance.
So going to Stephen's presentation was really great. Good job, Stephen. But one of the points he was talking about was the collaboration and transparency inside Google and how people can see each other's projects. They can easily contribute to other projects and all those good things which we love, and that's what we preach a lot to our clients. When we go into an organization and they're trying to move to that, one of the first things we look at, or one of the most common things we see, is that teams aren't really sharing much, or they're not either because of tooling or culture or whatever. They're just reduplicating things every time. They're reinventing wheels. Every team has their own API communication, even though they're all talking to the same API. They'll re-implement the same service 20 times. And you talked about a manager being stuck between C-suite and the developers who are actually building the thing. The problem we usually see is the incentives are wrong, or that teams are incentivized for short-term shipping, and so that's usually the most impactful thing you can look at and say, okay, what are you sharing, or what's being duplicated? What kind of inconsistent UI experiences are coming out of this? And it's that manager's job to help influence the C-suite to come up with new incentives, or to not place so much incentive on that short-term shipping things and focus more on how can we help the team work together? How can we incentivize this collaboration? How can we incentivize long-term health of these applications instead of just getting to market fast is important, but you may be hurting yourself from getting to market in the future from the choices they're making today. So that's a big challenge without a single solution. But getting incentives right is, if you don't get that right, then no other change will stick.
Yeah, it's still an optimization problem.
Yeah, I love everything Jeff said about incentives. What we used to see I don't know, I used to say 10 years ago, and now maybe it's 20 years ago, but maybe it's still today, is that it used to be that the higher-ups would dictate, this is what we need from IT, this is what we need from development, go build it and bring it back to me. And it was a dictated model, go build me this. And that worked well with Waterfall, right? Because then theoretically you build exactly what they asked for, and then it's successful. Maybe, probably not. But we've moved to a much better model, but we haven't always fixed the alignment across these organizations, right? So you have a necessity for a partnership between the different people at the different levels. Because if they're not partnering, then no one is going to be aligned. You know, like this idea of, I just need the feature done, get it done, I don't care how you do it, I just need it to cost as little as possible, is not the way that we need to build software in 2019 and beyond. We need to say, hey, do we want to be around in 10 years? Do we want this application to be around in 10 years? And if you're not thinking for the long term, then you're definitely not going to be incentivizing the right things. And the other thing to that I think is really an opportunity is alignment via communication of vision. And what I mean by that is you need these tools in order to successfully communicate the vision at the multiple levels. Because communication is probably the hardest thing that we do as organizations, as developers. And so having the right tools so that everyone knows not just what they're supposed to be doing, but how it fits into the bigger picture, I think that really goes to the heart of Agile. And I think having the right sets of tools to do that will drive that alignment, will eventually lead your company into more success.
Good. Anybody else want to comment on that one? All right. Go ahead. Well, here, we'll do the microphone jump.
So this may be a more difficult question to ask because I'm not sure if it falls under the umbrella of governance, but so, you know, we're NXifying a project now, and the first question that actually, well, hold on. So the first question that got asked was, you know, if NXifying something is, you know, the right way to do it, then why didn't Angular out of the box take that approach? So what they're worried about is that, you know, so we do it, we NXify the project, and then, you know, 2 years from now, Angular, the community says, you know what, we've decided that the monorepo approach is the right way to do it, but we've got our slight slant on how we want to do it. And so now my executives are upset because I NXified, but my NXifying is not the same as the official Angular way of doing it. So how do we stop that from happening? Or can we?
Mm-hmm. All right, who wants to jump on that? Well, we'll start with the NX guy.
So I guess a short answer is if we ever came to a place where the default Angular CLI and NX were solving the exact same problems, then we would figure out how to merge back into Angular CLI. I don't think that'll ever be the case. So NX, we solve for enterprise specifically. I think NX is useful beyond enterprise, but we decided that we would make decisions that are for enterprise teams, for large teams, which Angular CLI itself is not and doesn't. At least, like, I don't want to speak for them, but like it's more focused on general purpose. So you can build enterprise apps with it. It supports multiple projects. You know, it's not quite the same kind of dependency graph that you have with Bazel or with NX, but you can at least have multiple projects in a repo. But I think they don't want to place too much on on users who are using it. They don't want to enforce too many constraints and opinions on how to do things, and so. In terms of like the general monorepo sides of NX, I think that's where it stands, and that's the answer. NX does a lot more than just the monorepo stuff. Like, we focus on modern tooling. We also we support React with NX and things like generating your own workspace schematics and a lot of our own more prescriptive linting and formatting and things like that. So we take advantage of the liberties we have of working with enterprise teams, and we do the things that we see our clients wanting. So that's why I think it. You know, we'll always be doing things. If you're an enterprise team, NX will probably always be a little bit better, and it's close enough to Angular CLI that if we needed to, if it was redundant in the future, then definitely we would want to say, okay, let's just it outlived its usefulness. Let's go back to Angular CLI.
I like that we have new verb NXifying. So yeah, Jeff said that we're trying to be not that opinionated, and there are different approaches on solving this monorepo problem. And we definitely, although we have found out that monorepos work great for Google, we are not insisting that this is an ideal solution for every organization out there. In the Angular CLI, we have the opportunity for you to develop your like workspace as a composition of different libraries and applications. So far, we do not provide the incrementality elements that NX has, and this is because we are evaluating different approaches. So you can apply the incrementality and like the incremental builds that NX provides in certain way, which provides great ergonomic. But in the same time, this also provides a more restricted approach, specifically targeting JavaScript and TypeScript. On the other side, we have Bezo, which has been working incredibly inside of Google. And it is a more universal application, more universal build tool, more universal solution, which has its drawbacks, of course. If it is more universal, it probably cannot provide as good ergonomics as a specialized solution such as NX. So we have been discussing like a lot of times about like providing a level of incrementality in the Angular CLI. We have the different like distinguishment between libraries and workspaces already. We are not sure that there is an ultimate solution that works for everyone.
I'll give a slightly different perspective or extension on that. I think if we could find a generalizable solution that solved this problem for everybody, we would do it. But there's also a question of just time. Like our team does not have unlimited resources, and so we have to decide what we focus on. And this is one case where NX has just solved this big problem for the ecosystem, and we are happy to watch it grow and flourish. And kind of to your second point about like what happens in 3 years when the Angular team does say, hey, we want to get in and do this. We don't do anything without thinking about the community. And so similar to how the web standards organizations didn't want to flatten or add a flatten operator to JavaScript arrays because it would ruin 2% of the web or whatever, we don't want to ruin people's lives with anything we do. So we would, if that eventuality happened, if we ever did think we could do better than NX, we would work with NX either to help them or upstream them.
So I used to work on the Angular team, so I talked to Steven and the folks working on it. And actually, when we built NX, we collaborated with the Angular team because we were dogfooding the new schematics API and then the new architect API and things like that. So it's always been a collaboration between the teams, and that was what we talked about. We didn't want to fragment the community, and so we talked about our goals and how they're different. So like Steven said, it's something that we talk about, and we had decided yes, NX makes sense. It's a good thing for the community.
Yep.
Chris, we would not have NXified your project without knowing everything they already said.
That was well said.
Go
ahead.
Don't clearly have the technical depth of some of my esteemed colleagues here, nor do I claim it. But I do think what's interesting when you talk about governance and scale specifically is the comments that they just made about the way that they work together and how transparent that is. And I think that, organizations today are aspiring to that, but they're overcoming so much heritage of how they've been working over an extended period of time and where their leadership grew up, how technical those folks were. Today, as we touched on briefly, and as the use cases and expertise of these gentlemen here highlighted, the technology is the differentiator, and at Google, it's all technology, right? So they're not trying to make an adjustment in how they work or the nature of that culture. And some of the other tech behemoths over the years, we may know, having been in the software business for a long time, their model might have been, I want to get to know you and all the smart things that you do, and then I will co-opt that myself or build it and then, become you, and thank you very much for the expertise that you delivered. So I think what's encouraging around at least all of these activities and these organizational conversations about scale is the clear understanding today that they can't keep doing what they were doing the way they were doing it. They have to be more collaborative, more cross-functional, more transparent. And without that transparency, in our case, the tooling certainly doesn't matter. If you're not willing to have those honest conversations, about prioritization or the value associated with whatever it is you're investing significant resources in creating, then you don't get that change. And so whether it's at a much more technical detail level or an organizational level, I think those, the need for changing that mindset and culture around how people work together and how collaborative they are and how transparent they are is foundational. And I'm certain, as you presented, that, plays a massive role in why you've grown the way you have.
Good.
So I actually want to throw out one strategy that I've seen get some momentum at a bunch of different companies, and I call it the viral mono repository. So what you do is you start with one of your shared services team, and you take their single library, their single tool, whatever that is, and you declare it a mono repository. And you say, anyone in the company that wants to be fully integrated with us and is willing to play by our rules, join the mono repository. Add your application to us. And what happens is a first customer will come in and say, okay, well, I want you to stop breaking me, so I'm going to put my application in your repository. And then they get these kind of immediate benefits, but then they also have to play with that they have to play ball with that culture, and they have to adopt that culture. And then after one team does it, another team does it, and these things slowly start to grow to more and more of an organization. I don't know if anyone else has seen that.
Yeah, this might sound astonishingly familiar, Chris.
Very much.
So I do want to go back to, you mentioned transparency. I wanted to build on that a little bit. You talk to any management team, and everybody's going to be for transparency that applies to the other guy and the other guy's organization. Is there is there a teachable moment that you guys have seen when an organization gets to a point of, okay, we actually have to be transparent now. We have to start to open things up and make things work, or even just any other. If you're not thinking of anything, how would you communicate to those folks and help convince them that their world isn't going to end because they became transparent? And I'm talking about the real transparency that you guys are talking idealistically about applied, because it's a very tough thing for humans to do. Come on, Bill.
There's a reason I'm a consultant as opposed to an employee, because every time I was an employee trying to do that stuff, I had to not be an employee anymore. No, slightly more seriously, though, this is, if there's a central theme to everything we talked about, I'm looking at Jeff, it all seems to come back to where our conversation ended last night, all around the honesty, the transparency, the forthrightness, the centrality of people and the communication, because all the technology is wonderful, all the technology is great, but if you're just trying to spackle the technology on top of a broken organization, or an organization that's not willing to take those steps to move forward, to transform itself this way, you're just going to do the wrong things faster. It's not going to make things better. I've tried two main approaches, and they're not going to be a surprise. One of them is in organizations where I've got enough executive level buy-in at the CEO, board level, whatever. Sometimes it's from the very top. Someone simply says, this is the way we are now. Get on board or go away. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I have had more success, and frankly, I prefer something closer to what you were just talking about, the virality. Pick a small part of the organization. Pick the part of the organization you can be effective in, where you've got people who are willing to listen, who clearly get what it is you're trying to convey, and then be really, really effective there. And let the rest of the organization come to you. As opposed to, grabbing the horse and trying to shove its head under the water. It's like, the water over here is fantastic. Look how great things are over here now. Mm-hmm. And gradually more and more of the organization comes to that conclusion kind of on their own. They don't have to be sold. They come to you wanting to buy. That, to me, is much more effective and, frankly, more humane.
I'm going to kind of second what Bill's saying in a slightly different angle. So this is the Software Governance Forum. So software has done many things for us, right? But one thing it probably has not done is actually promoted things like vulnerability, promoted things like face-to-face conversations. because a lot of times software will actually give us tools to help save time and even avoid those conversations in a good way. But we have to remember that things get done, especially difficult things get done when you're talking to people. This is something that Agile reminded us of, is that you have to actually have face-to-face conversations with people. This is what I experience with the clients that we work with, whether they're dealing with governance or they're just dealing with an implementation process. The first thing I say to them is, okay, how are we getting in a room? How are we talking together? When I do a software training class, I will tell people how many teams are using the software. Well, we've got 5 or 10 teams. Okay, I want representation for all of those teams in my training room at the same time. Well, they do different things. I don't care. Because the amazing thing that happens is you bring 1 or 2 people, champions from a team, into a room, even if that team is doing things completely different from each other, they start having conversations. They find common ground. They start learning from each other. And so I think when it comes to governance, the same thing has to happen. You have to promote from the top down the idea of just real conversations with people.
Anybody else want to jump in on this one? No.
You know, it's interesting, even as I was listening to your comment, Bill, about an executive requiring that, or making a fairly firm edict that we're changing the way we do this, and you know, we're now going to act differently, and yet it's an executive edict in that way. So it's just interesting how challenging these problems are at scale. The one thing I can tell you that we find is an excellent starting point for a lot of this, as Bill also noted, is finding a high-performing team of teams, if you will. And then what we talk about in the Atlassian user space is making the work visible. Part of the big challenge that exists in a lot of these enterprises with hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of Jira users, by way of example, is that they don't have a good mechanism then to tie the excellent work of those technical teams up to something else that's reportable and required by leadership, so that they understand the status of spend and financial reporting around CapEx, OpEx, and all those challenges. So for us, it's about providing a bit of a hierarchical construct above that work of the teams, in Jira's case, in epics and stories, and then being able to relate that up to things like initiatives, those funded items, or whatever they get called, and then the strategic themes of the business that are really running. And we find as soon as you establish that connectivity and you make that work visible against that larger hierarchy, 2 things happen. Number one, executives start to feel like the mystery of what's happening in those technical teams becomes more relatable and reportable in a fashion that they're desperate to, whether it's maintain control or just understand the status. That starts to happen. And then that trust starts to build, right? Because now that work is there, everyone's well-intended about the work they're trying to perform, whether they're siloed or you know, protective of it or not. They're all trying to do good work unequivocally. So then the question becomes, okay, now this work is more visible. It's tied to something that's important to the organization. That gets some virality to it in our experience.
Good. So, all right, last question, then we'll wrap. Give me one thing that surprised you today that you learned. We're all lifelong learners here. What'd you learn today? Steve, you're on the spot.
I know, I'm holding the microphone, so I guess I have to start. Wow, so I'm more of a processes consulting type person than a software person. So I can answer that really easily, in that I learned a lot about things like Google's processes as a software company, and Bazel and NX, and these things that I often don't, a part of a world that I often don't live in. So, but I guess if I were to generalize that, it's amazing to me how the concepts of good governance can apply across multiple different platforms.
I learned a couple things from Steven's talk, I should say, but it was mostly technology things I didn't know about, like Gyve and Google's code search being open, or at least available in the public, which was pretty cool and exciting. That's the thing I missed about Google. One thing I missed, other than the free food, was the code search tooling.
Yeah, just came into that free food world. It's wild. At least to me. I learned that I'm not going to become a world-class programmer in the remainder of my career. That was very clear by what was shared. And I learned that this notion of working together and collaborating more effectively is foundational to any organization's success in the marketplace, period. And there are many levels at which that can happen. But if it doesn't happen, then you are a dinosaur roaming the earth, and it's only a matter of time at that point, because other organizations are doing that so aggressively and so effectively that the competitive landscape is changing at a pace that, organizations who don't adopt that won't keep up with.
I was impressed by the fascinating UI of Jira that Chad demonstrated, and the visibility of the organization that it provides.
I learned about how everyone is coming from some very, very different governance contexts, and that even what the definition of governance is probably different to everybody in the room. And so I think we have a long way to go as all of our industries combined to better ourselves and to share our best practices and figure out what do we care about and how do we do it better.
To echo a couple of comments I already heard, and I was pleasantly surprised to hear from not this Jeff, but the next Jeff. There were things about the internal Google processes and internal technology that surprised even you. And I know you're pretty recently there, so the fact that I was surprised, I kind of felt bad because I'm like, I interact with Google people all the time. I should have known this already. And then Jeff's like, I didn't know that. I'm like, cool. I'm not as far behind as I thought I was. Not so much learning of a new thing, but reinforcing of a notion that I think is pretty important. I'm, at heart, I'm a coder. I'm a developer. I'm a guy who wants to build cool stuff and make people happy with the things that I build. And I'll admit my bias. A lot of the structures and the processes and the perceived rigidity of a lot of this stuff. My bias kicks in at that part, and I'm a little bit concerned about it. But there's something that I learned a few years ago when I first started really working closely with Michael and the folks at Oasis, and then later the folks at XPM. I've stood in front of a lot of developers, typically in like the Angular Bootcamp classes, and have told them, or I've asked them, how you folks feel about, say, Jira? And everybody goes, ugh. And I'm like, the weirdest thing has happened. I've met people who know how to make that not suck. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah. And then I tell them about Oasis, tell them about XPM, and I'm like, no, it turns out that if you come at this with the right mindset, with the right cultural shift in mind, with all the things we keep talking about, the honesty, the transparency, the openness, the willingness to do what is necessary, then the tool becomes effective. It's no longer a cudgel. It's no longer a weapon to be wielded against developers. It's a thing that actually enables them to accomplish amazing things. And it turns out developers actually like to do good stuff, and they like to be efficient about it, and they like to deliver software on time, and they like their estimates to be accurate. They like all of these things, and it is actually possible for the goals of the providers of these tools, the makers of these processes, to align with the people who use these processes. And I heard that again over and over and over today, echoing those themes that we talked about last night at dinner and we heard over and over again today. The transparency, the honesty, the communication, the importance of people and culture in all of this. And the tools enable the good things if you have the culture and the communication in place.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. Well, I'll wrap up here. We are going to shut down the live stream here in a moment. We are actually trying to make a difference by talking about these things. And we talk about them with our clients. We talk about them on our projects. And hopefully a couple of years from now, we'll be a lot further along as an industry. And hopefully by understanding the past, we aren't repeating the past in these things, as many of us that have been around for many decades have watched. So anyway, since everybody on the live stream can't join us for drinks afterwards, we're going to say bye. And thank you for joining. So,